Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Game week continues here in Happy Valley, and it's a big one, as everyone knows by now. The whiteout is approaching Saturday evening. Number 6, Oregon visits number 3, Penn State to kick off Big Ten play here in Happy Valley. A lot of commotion around this one. ESPN's College Game Day will be here on campus. A ton of talent on the field, coaching stars on the sideline, and we're going to break things down when it comes to Oregon in just a matter of moments. We're going to bring in one of our Ducks experts from within our 24/7 Sports Network. I say this every year when we get to Big Ten play, but now that we're in conference action, we'll get to tap into our 24/7 Sports Network of expert analysts on a week-to-week basis, and we're fortunate to do that right now. I was on their podcast earlier this week. They're returning the favor now, so we bring on Eric Skopel, who covers the Oregon Ducks for Duck Territory, our Oregon home on the 24/7 Sports Network. Eric, I enjoyed the conversation with you. I had a lot to say about Penn State on your show. We're going to switch it up, and you're going to have a lot to say about Oregon on our show. Thanks for the time.
Of course, yeah, and I'm ready. I can be long-winded if you want.
To be as long-winded as you like, because I think we're all curious to learn more about Penn State's premier test to this point. And it goes without saying that we didn't learn a ton about the Nittany Lions during a 3-0 start. Obviously, we got some flashes, but things are going to ramp up in a significant way this Saturday. Tell us a little bit about the pathway to this point for the 4-0 Oregon Ducks.
I think it's been interesting seeing how similar this feels for both programs. It almost feels like if you're on a staircase, you had to leap like 5 steps, right? Both teams played basically nobody with the pulse in non-con, won decisively in all those games. And now it's like this big leap to like maybe 2 of the very best teams in the country. At least that's what the polls think. That's what every preseason thinks. And I say maybe because I think for both teams, it's reasonable to ask, like, how good are they really? Just because of the lack of challenge so far. I think we all know the talent on both sides, the coaching stars, like you mentioned, on both sides. Like there's a lot of reasons to think these are maybe 2 of the best teams in the country, maybe the 2 best teams in this conference. But I think we're going to learn on Saturday a lot. And just to see how these teams stack up is something I'm excited about, thrilled about, been waiting anxiously for. I think the Oregon fan base is probably very similar to the Penn State fan base, where they've just been sitting there going, okay, they're winning by a ton of points, but let's nitpick every little thing. Okay, are the run fits good? Okay, well, what's going on in the passing game? Is this exactly how we want to distribute? Shouldn't Kenyon Sadiq get the ball more? Oh, the offensive line gave up a sack. Like, what's going on there? Is the right side the weak point now? Like, oh, they didn't have to punt. Is the punting, is the punting situation a problem? Like, this is kind of what the conversations have been. And now you get to a point where you can at least hopefully have some answers, at least of like, hey, against the very best in the country, we think this is what it looks like.
Let's go through the early stepping stones for Oregon to this point. They opened with a win over Montana State, 59-13. Followed that up with a 69-3 win over Oklahoma State. Their coach, Mike Gundy, was fired a couple days ago. Northwestern on the road in their Big Ten opener won 34-14. And then last week, rivalry game against Oregon State, a 41-7 home victory for Oregon. And so, as you said, it's been nitpicking season for us here too. What were your top nitpicks about Oregon? Because I think when people look at the averaging 50 points per game and 4-0 and these are runaway victories, from the outside looking in, it's a little tough to poke holes. And I'm sure maybe some people feel the same way about Penn State. I have no doubt that no one is complaining more about the Penn State play thus far than the locals who have watched every minute of every game. So give us kind of the feedback in terms of what Oregon maybe hasn't done excellent yet so far.
Okay, I think they played 14 of 16 quarters up to the standard, and that's a phrase that Dan Lanning uses all the time to kind of indicate what the standard is, what the expectation is, and they've reached it in 14 of 16. The 2 quarters they didn't reach them was the 4th quarter at Northwestern. They were at 34-0 in that game, gave up a couple late scores. Dan Lanning was frustrated about it. Fans made a huge deal about it. It screwed up the rushing yard defense. They gave up a 79-yard touchdown with like a couple minutes to go, and people were suddenly really worried about the rush defense. And I get it in the context of this game with what Penn State did last year, almost rushing for 300 yards. That became the primary nitpick. And then the first quarter against Oregon State, 7-7 after 1 quarter. Again, back-to-back quarters. You had kind of your worst 2 quarters of the season. I think fans got a little anxious. What's wrong here? The defensive backs, and this is something we'll talk about, I'm sure, as we get kind of through the roster, they're starting 3 freshmen. And there have been some instances where they've had some kind of coverage breakdowns, some issues in kind of maybe communication. And one of those took place on Saturday that led to Oregon State's first touchdown and only touchdown of the game. Fans were freaking out about that. Should Tosh Lupoy be the defensive coordinator? What's going on out here? Should we change the personnel? Do we need more veteran players out here? All these sorts of questions. And yet they end up winning the game 41-7. Oregon State barely gets the ball across midfield the rest of the game. So I think the two big nitpicks were, defensively primarily. And then I will also say, I think against Northwestern, there was frustration that the first team offense had to punt. That was something that didn't happen in the first two games. Didn't happen again. Well, I guess it did happen against Oregon State once, but the fact that their first drive of the game didn't come right down the field, score a touchdown, I think was something that was a concern a little bit of how do they handle the moment. And especially, kind of in the framing of this game where you're going into an environment where I've said a couple times and it's not even inaccurate, literally 100,000 more people at Penn State at Beaver Stadium than whatever Northwestern's, short-term, fix of a soccer lacrosse stadium was. They had like 12,000 people there. So literally probably the largest range. I don't know if this is a stat kept of like in road environments to start a season, going from one where you're at 12,000 to another where you're at 110,000, but it was decidedly the worst start they've had so far. And that was away from home. So I think those are the current nitpicks primarily. And the run defense one kind of leading the way without question.
We'll get into a lot of personnel conversation here, but I want to go back to atmosphere because you talked about it. The first road game they played in the Big Ten is nothing like what awaits here on Saturday night. But I know that Autzen Stadium is a hell of an atmosphere, and I think a lot of us took notice of that in Big Ten territory when they hosted Ohio State and beat Ohio State last season. What is kind of the talk around what awaits for them in the whiteout crowd and how they're going to deal with it? What are you hearing from players and coaches this week out there?
I think there's a lot of respect for this atmosphere. Joe Lorick, who used to be on the Penn State staff a while ago, special teams coordinator, we haven't spoken with him, but he relayed some messages and some information to Dan of like how serious this is. Because Dan hasn't been here. Dan's been in some of the tougher environments down in the SEC. Obviously, he played at the Big House last year. He's coached in some tough places, but this is a different one. And I think the reputation sort of speaks for itself. And so there's been a lot of respect for this environment. There's also been a lot of, from the offensive players, at least, the onus is on us to land that first punch, and maybe we can quiet those guys down. Like if we can get off to the kind of fast start we've had in the last couple of games, especially the first 3 home games, hey, maybe we can kind of mitigate some of that, kind of nullify some of that atmosphere. But yeah, I don't think anybody's overlooking it. I don't think anybody is sort of suggesting like, oh, we've been here before, because frankly, you look at this roster, and this is one of the big differences between Penn State and Oregon on paper, at least, is Oregon only has 4 returning starters. There's a lot of young personnel here, and a lot of those on the offense are guys who are transfers who maybe didn't play at big schools. Like Isaiah World was at Nevada, a school you guys played earlier this year. Alex Harkey was at Texas State, not exactly a program that's played in a 110,000 person stadium before, right? This is the offensive line personnel. So I think there's a lot of respect. There's also sort of an awareness of like, hey, if the offense can kind of land some early punches and be successful, maybe we can kind of make it so that the third and the second half isn't quite as intense as it could be.
I brought up something similar to quarterback Drew Aller this morning on a Zoom call, because I was talking about, how important is a fast start for this offense for Penn State, because last year the Nittany Lions found themselves in a hole early in Indianapolis. They spent the entire game digging out of it, ultimately got close to the surface, but didn't quite get to the top, lost by 8 points. And additionally, though, I think in this setting, yeah, there's a risk where you could lose some of that excitement from the crowd, some of that enthusiasm from the crowd, and if Oregon can start early. So something certainly to monitor in this matchup. Let's talk about the offense. I felt like going into the 2024 Big Ten championship game and throughout that matchup that Dylan Gabriel was an X factor, a separating factor between these two teams. I think he proved that on that particular evening, but he's now trying to carve out his opportunities in the NFL. New starting quarterback, Dante Moore. We're pretty familiar with him around here because Penn State pushed hard to land him as a recruit. He spent some time on campus. We've got some photos up in our galleries from way back when he was around here with the staff. Obviously, he initially lands with UCLA and Chip Kelly, works his way to Oregon, spends some time watching, waiting, and now it's his moment. Thus far, 75+% completion rating, 11 touchdowns versus 1 interception. Can you kind of dive into the details a bit on what Dante Moore has shown and perhaps what Dante Moore has not yet shown as the starting quarterback for Oregon?
I was asked in our mailbag episode on Monday on our podcast of like what position group has impressed me the most, and that was my answer. And just because you go from Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, two guys who finished the year as Heisman Trophy finalists the last 2 years, two guys who were drafted relatively early in the NFL draft. Bo obviously goes out and has a great rookie season for Denver, and we'll see what Dylan can do in Cleveland. But like they've had these super experienced veteran presences that kind of, they've been through all this before. And Dante's kind of the reputation at UCLA, and it didn't necessarily match in talking to some of the recruiting people out in the Midwest. What the reputation was coming out of high school was doesn't really make the right decision, kind of forces it, maybe kind of panics a little bit, struggles with kind of what happens when there's pressure. And I will say, Oregon's faced very little pressure. He was sacked one time and it came in the last game, and I think maybe pressured about half a dozen times prior to that. So hasn't really faced that. That's going to be a big test, and that's probably my answer of like what he hasn't shown so far is just what does he deal with when, whether it be denied Dennis Sutton or some of the other edge players, some of the internal pressure gets there, some of the, maybe exotic blitz looks that Jim Knowles might dial up, kind of what all that looks like. But I think the thing that's really impressed through 4 games is the decision-making, is he hasn't put the ball up for grabs. He hasn't put the ball in situations really where it can be taken away. The one interception was a deep throw down the field where both Lanning and Moore said it was the right read. It's just, there was a lot of wind coming in. The ball kind of hung up there, and the defensive player made a great play, kind of backing out of a linebacker dropping like 40 yards downfield to intercept it. So the decision-making has been really impressive. The arm talent, I kind of think we already knew that was there, but I think the two things that really stand out in terms of his delivery is Oregon runs a lot of screen game. I think that's pretty well established. He is a really quick side release guy in the screen game. He gives those players kind of an extra, half second, a second or so to get upfield to kind of figure out where they want to go in the screen game. So that stood out. And then the vertical passing game, I would say he's probably the best deep pass Oregon's had since Justin Herbert. And they've had some good ones. Dylan Gabriel threw some great balls last year. Bo Nix, maybe not known for the deep ball necessarily, but had some nice throws. The throw against Oklahoma State to Malik Benson really stands out to me as one of the better quarterback throws we've seen from this program, in half a decade or so. So a lot of things are checking the marks. And I guess back to kind of what we haven't seen, what's he do when he gets pressure in the face, which I think will happen far more on Saturday than it has the rest of the season combined. And then how does he deal with the atmosphere, playing, with the noise, with the crowd noise, that's going to be an impact. And then how does he play? Like if this is a fourth quarter game and there's no forgiveness, right? Like, when you're up 55-3 against Oklahoma State and you don't score on that drive, like who really cares? But when it's 21-21 in the middle of the fourth quarter in a massive game in a big environment, how do you handle that? So I think those are the things that are kind of, I guess, to be determined from him.
Let's talk about the playmakers he's going to rely on in the pass game, because along with Dylan Gabriel, you no longer have to worry about Tez Johnson if you're the Penn State defense, which is good news because last December, 11 catches, 181 yards, a touchdown in that Big Ten championship game. He's moved on to chase his NFL career, and a significant injury at the receiver position that Oregon had to deal with going into preseason camp. So bring us up to speed. I know there's a fresh 5-star on campus who's making noise already, but when Gabriel's going downfield, they've got talent at tight end. They've got some interesting rising players at wide receiver. Talk us through everything.
Yeah, it's been interesting. And I think the Evan Stewart injury is a really important place to start and just sort of provide the framework of kind of what's happened here. He was supposed to be, apologize, I think there's some outdoor noise there. He was supposed to be the primary X receiver this year. This was supposed to be his year to break out. Had kind of an up and down, inconsistent first year with Oregon after coming over from A&M. And I think the expectation was like, hey, this could be a guy who has 1,000 yards, parlays that into an early NFL draft pick, super talented. Unfortunately, he goes down with a knee injury back in June. And that sort of forced him to reshuffle the deck a little bit. I don't think it's unexpected that DeCorian Moore, the true freshman you mentioned, has solidified himself as their top receiver, or that Kenyon Sadiq, a really, really talented tight end who showed some flashes, certainly in the Big Ten championship game last year, has also emerged as one of the other main playmakers. But I think it's really been Malik Benson, a transfer from Florida State, who top JUCO receiver in the country a couple of years ago, goes to Alabama, pretty underwhelming year, goes to Florida State, kind of almost even more underwhelming considering the role that was expected. Quarterback play there clearly wasn't up to snuff, but he was kind of overlooked. And he's come out and been arguably their most important downfield threat. I mentioned earlier the long touchdown against Oklahoma State that went to Benson. He's also showed the ability to make some tough catches in traffic and to elevate and out-leap some players and make some plays. So those are the three primary players to know. DeCorian can do just about everything on the football field. He's obviously nowhere near the size of a Jeremiah Smith, but from an impact perspective in an offense that's really prolific, he's going to be a player that's talked about a lot this year, I think. Kind of maybe more like a Jamar Chase style receiver in terms of size and kind of explosiveness. Kenyon Sadiq, I think Penn State fans are fairly familiar with him, but that guy has so many NFL traits and has really evolved as a blocker. And then Benson is the speed guy. I think his average depth of target's like 3 yards further than anybody on the team. He's the one running those deep posts, those deep routes down the field, and doing so with a lot of success. So those are the 3 big names to know there. And there's some other players, and I guess one thing I will note is that they are dealing with quite a few injuries. It's not just Evan Stewart. They have, I think, 3 other scholarship receivers out for this game. Depth could be a problem. If they lose a couple more, they still have 6 players they're rotating through pretty regularly, but that's maybe a thing to monitor if you're Penn State. If you see a couple Oregon receivers limp off the sideline, they might be kind of getting short on numbers.
James Franklin was really quick to point out Kenyon Sadiq as a guy they really have a lot of respect for. They think Oregon uses him in a lot of interesting ways. And he actually referenced what they were able to do with Tyler Warren last season. He seems to think that they have a high caliber tight end. And we saw obviously flashes of that in the Big Ten championship game. 17 yards per catch on the season so far for the tight end, 3 touchdowns as well. How about the ground game? I know that's another area where, an injury has kind of impacted who's out there, who's not out there. What does it look like for the stable of running backs going into this matchup? Will they lean on one guy? And how is the offensive line holding up end of the bargain through the first 4 games?
I think that's like one of the bigger question marks coming in, to be honest, is what does this rotation look like? I think people were expecting Mekhi Hughes, the Tulane transfer, who I believe has more rushing yards coming into the season than anyone in college football, like over this course of his career. He debuted as running back 5 against Montana State. And everybody was like, is he dealing with this? I got so many text messages. Is he suspended? Is he hurt? Like, what's going on? Well, he didn't make his debut till like the final drive of the first half. And it appears to be the answer is he's been beaten out by guys, and he's kind of slowly moved his way up. I think he's probably running back 3 or 4 currently. And some of that does depend on, as you kind of noted there, Noah Whittington, the number 1 running back, kind of won that job in camp. Has been dealing with an injury, didn't play the last 2 weeks. Lanning said on Monday he expects he'll play. That's one to monitor. I think I've kind of put it this way a couple of times. I think he's the most complete of the running backs, but they can supplement what he does if he doesn't play with the strengths of some of the other runners. Like a Jaden Lamar has the power that Noah Whittington has. A De'Ara Hill, a true freshman, has the explosiveness, the home run ability to get it downfield that Noah has. Jay Harris runs similarly in terms of kind of the pad level and the way he kind of runs through players. So there's some similarities amongst the other running backs, but there's probably not a player more reliable than Noah, who's a 6th-year senior who's been in this program for 4 years. Having him back would be a big win for them if he's unable to go, or if he gets knocked out of the game and can't finish. I think that would be a sizable development. And really so far, Jaden Lamar has been, I think, that is a junior running back, kind of a really polarizing player in the fan base. I'm sure Tyler deal with this, where there's a guy who, like, some of the fans love this guy. Some of the fans think this guy stinks. Like, there's not really any middle ground. It's kind of one or the other. He's been the primary runner when Noah's not played. I would expect that would be the case here. He is a hulking running back, a great blocker. Maybe lacks a little bit of that twitch that you would like to see, but certainly somebody capable of taking it to the house too. So those are the running backs. Again, there's a lot of them. I don't even think I touched on all of them. They got a freshman, Jordan Davis, who has 6 rushing touchdowns. He's been their goal line guy. That's a name you might see if Oregon, and it wouldn't be good for Penn State fans, but if all gets close to the goal line, that's who's going to be out there in their power unit. And then the offensive line is to me, a question mark. Unlike Penn State, who returns, I think, right, all 5 offensive line starters, essentially, or at least all the 5 that were kind of out there towards the end of the year. Oregon got one back in Iapani Lalalu, their center, and it's an important one, but they've replaced him with a bunch of transfers. Isaiah World was a big-time transfer prospect, the number 1, I think, overall prospect until Nico hit the portal out of Tennessee. And then Emmanuel Pregnon at guard and Alex Harkey at right tackle. I'd say it's been more impressive in pass protection than in rush defense or rush blocking, I'd say, so far. We'll see kind of, this is going to be the toughest matchup in both regards, but big athletic guys without question.
Defensively, what stands out about that unit so far? Who are the playmakers who have that ability to switch momentum on the road this Saturday?
Yeah, I think it's a really young group. I'll start in the secondary because I think it's the most interesting. I mean, they are starting 3 freshmen out there, and 2 of which are from the DMV out kind of in your guys' neck of the woods. Ify Obadegwu, Brandon Finney. I'm sure I know players Penn State recruited. Penn State fans are probably very familiar with. They both solidified starting roles really early in their careers. I'd say unexpectedly in Finney's case. Obadegwu was somebody who was hurt last year. I think if he wasn't, he would have played quite a bit. Big, rangy, athletic corners have not been tested so far this year. And I think that's going to be something that's interesting to see how they handle it. Dylan Thienemann's addition was huge from Purdue. Another guy I think Penn State fans probably know just from those matchups, one of the few standouts from that Purdue program the last couple of years. He's a big athletic, I'd say probably the most athletic safety Oregon's had since Javon Holland back in 2019, 2020. A player that they've used a lot of different personnel packages because of him. Obviously no one is saying he's a one-to-one with Caleb Downs, but they've kind of adapted some of what Ohio State did with Caleb Downs in terms of using him as kind of like almost a rover, kind of that versatile kind of safety role to get an extra body on the field in certain fits. And he's been really successful there. So he's allowed them to be creative. Linebacker, Bryce Betcher, veteran player, kind of the heart and soul of the defense, local kid, grew up in South Eugene, former baseball player, drafted by the Astros in the 12th round a couple of years ago. He's kind of a dual sport guy, super talented. Again, heart and soul tackle leader last year, probably going to be the tackles leader this year by quite a large margin. And then at linebacker next to him, Jerry Mixon's been, I'd say, kind of the big surprise. Cousin of Joe, the NFL running back, super impressive playmaker in coverage, already has 2 interceptions, one for a pick 6. He's a player to be aware of in terms of game-changing plays. It seems like that's kind of has a knack for just kind of jumping routes, and that's been impressive at that position. And then up front, 2 edges, Mateo Uiagalelei and Tatum Tuioti, have really kind of solidified themselves for the last 3 years as the primary guys there, continuing to do that. Mateo's certainly grown as a rush defender so far. I think one of the big questions is how does he hold up on Saturday? The middle of the defensive line is another one where incredible size, 3 guys who are over 330 pounds, they play a lot. It's a question of pad level. It's a question of technique. It's a question of toughness. Amari Washington would be the player to note there. He's very explosive, very twitchy for a guy his size. Certainly probably the name to know up front if you're watching in short yardage situations.
That name, Brendan Finney, boy, did that set a light bulb off for me, because he was a guy that Penn State really felt confident about. He ends up going across the country, and now he's starting. And I know that Joey Porter Jr. was the comparison that this Penn State staff had for him as a prospect. And he's from a school, McDonough, which has been a perennial pipeline for Penn State, including Denai Dennis Sutton, who's one of the stars in this game. So that one stings a little bit. That mention's going to sting a little bit, although Penn State's not hurting for talent at cornerback in this moment, but someone to watch on the field. Last December, I think even those of us who followed Penn State for the first 12 games of the season were quite surprised to see the way they really took it to Oregon on the ground. And that ended up kind of opening the floodgates for Penn State. They had a lot of success from the rush attack during the postseason, and that was what kicked it off kind of. How much is that part of the internal conversation this week from you gathered of avoiding a repeat performance? Because I'd imagine if things play out similarly in Beaver Stadium, it could be a long night for the Ducks.
I think that's, like I said earlier, that's the big nitpick going in, because that's what people were focused on kind of in the context of this matchup leading into the season is okay, we have to find a way to be better on the ground. And that's the fans saying that, that's Dan Lanning saying that, that's the players saying that. I think that there's an understanding of that was not up to standard. A lot of things they did in the Big Ten championship game that was not close to it. That's the most rushing yards Dan Lanning defense has given up in his time at Oregon. The next closest was 260, I think. That was a uncharacteristic defensive performance. And again, the thing that's notable is Oregon lost 3 defensive linemen to the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft off of last year's team. They lost their second leading tackler, a linebacker, Jeffrey Boss, who was kind of a veteran from a year ago. And they're replacing them with guys who I think people think are talented. I think there's a question of whether or not they're ready for this moment. And again, that to me is if you're going to highlight a matchup, it's this experienced veteran Penn State offensive line against an Oregon defensive line that is playing a lot of first and second year players that are big and physical, but how do they match up in this game? And I guess defensively, what does Tosh Lupoy have in the bag that's different than what he had last time? I think that was something that Dan Lanning did mention on Monday of there were certain things they were willing to give up because they had the lead there. If they don't have the lead, are they able to play things? Are they able to change things up, play different defenses, find ways to get in the hole there in the gaps and make sure they can't run wild. And I think Oregon fans have a ton of respect for both of these running backs. I know I do. You mentioned on our show, and I kind of noticed it in the research of like, you think all the great Penn State running backs, like it's pretty wild. Two guys who played together for 4 years are potentially going to be 1 and 2 on the all-time rushing list. Like that's notable in today's college football, to have two guys that could rush for almost 4,000 career rushing yards if everything goes right and they make a deep run this year. There's a lot of respect for those two guys, and it's going to be, I think, pivotal. Like, I don't know if Oregon can win this game if it's close to 300 yards again.
The point spread for this game, right around a field goal, with that noted. Special teams, because neither of these teams have had to, rely on special teams to win a game yet, and they haven't been burned by a special teams disaster to lose a game. But this is the kind of setting where that can happen. So what do you know about this Oregon special teams unit? Maybe the possible strengths and potential weaknesses?
I think they feel really good about where they're at from a place kicking perspective. Atticus Sappington's been very accurate in his time here. He hit a 60-yard field goal in fall camp. He tried, I think, a 56-yarder in the opener, missed it. Wasn't all that, didn't hit it very clean. But they feel pretty good about him being a reliable presence. He's hit some big kicks in his time here, been very reliable. The punting game is like very interesting. They have on the roster Ross James, who's the school's all-time punt average leader by a pretty good margin. And then they thought that wasn't good enough, and they went and replaced him with Boise State's punter, who was the all-time Boise State record holder in punts. And that player, James Ferguson Reynolds, actually won the job over Ross James. So you got the school's all-time punt leader sitting on the sideline watching, which is notable. Hasn't had to be called into action very much, but has looked the part when he has. The Australian punter does some funky stuff on Saturday against Oregon State, actually kind of called his own fake punt number and ran it for a first down. It sounds like that was kind of an option for him to just, like, if he sees it on the field, and he's cagey enough to see it and take it. So that's notable. I think the return game, we haven't seen a whole lot of pop from it. If there's something to kind of nitpick, Gary Bryant Jr. is their starting slot receiver. Very reliable hands, sure-handed guy. They kind of prioritize, like, let's put a guy out there who's going to catch the football over a guy who's dynamic. DeCorian Moore has been the other punt returner, and he's shown a lot more wiggle dynamic. Just been way more dynamic with the football, I think, is an easy way to put it. And so, like, I wonder if, like, they're called into a spot where they need that special teams kind of spark. Do they throw him out there, even though he might not be quite as reliable, maybe quite the same veteran presence? So, and I don't even do we even talk about kick returns anymore in college football?
We talked about it here because King Mack had a 73-yard return in game one, but I mean, it's usually not much of a conversation.
I hate to say it. I wish they'd adopt the NFL. I love what they're doing in the NFL. It's just brought some more fun back to kick returns. But yeah, there's been so little. Well, there hasn't been a lot given up, and there's been very little that's really kind of stood out from there. They usually have two of their primary running backs back there. Again, kind of reliable guys, catch the football, try to make the most out of it. So.
Well, let's finish here. Curious, as we talk on Wednesday afternoon, where Oregon wins if it happens, where Oregon loses if it goes another way, and ultimately, what is your score prediction for this matchup?
I think the thing that, like, just to start, there's this baseline of, like, the psychology of Oregon, a very young and experienced team going into this environment. Like, it can go one of two ways. It can rattle them. They can get kind of out of sorts, not play up to, quote unquote, their standard, not look like a team that is capable of competing for much of anything this year, because they're just not up for a challenge that's really unique to a lot of these guys. The other side is young team, kind of ignorance is bliss. They go out there, they go, hey, we don't really understand the moment or what's going on necessarily. Let's just go play football, and they block it out. And this is an Oregon team that I feel comfortable saying is as talented as Penn State on paper, at least from, look at recruiting rankings and kind of the caliber of future NFL talent. Hey, let's go win this thing. And they show up. So I think that's like the baseline threshold is, like, are they afraid of the moment? Because if they are, this game is not going to be a game that matters in the fourth quarter. If they are up for the moment, this is a game Oregon can absolutely win. So that's going to be, like, I think early on, I think we'll have a sense of that. Like I mentioned earlier, like, can they, land that first punch? Well, if they not only don't land the first punch, but they don't land the second, third, or fourth punch, and this game gets kind of out of hand, what happens there? So there's that one. I've already mentioned trench play. I think Oregon gives themselves a real chance to win if they can outrush Penn State. I think that's a massive reach in terms of expectation, but the baseline for this has to be, you can't get outrun 297 to, I can't remember what Oregon finished last year with, like, it was like 180 or something like that, 160. You can't get outrun like that. And especially in a game where I do think Oregon may have the quarterback advantage, at least based upon what I've seen early in the season. We'll see, I guess, another part, kind of piggybacking off my earlier point, is Dante Moore, just as one individual player in this kind of a moment, how does he fare? I think he's talented enough to lead this offense, but you've got to find a way to slow Penn State down too. And I don't think you want to put everything on his shoulders and say, hey, let's see if he can go win us this football game. I don't think that's your preference. So those are a couple of things that kind of stand out there. And then I guess the other thing would be just the explosive plays. I think one thing that's notable with Penn State is just the speed and explosiveness on the outside at receiver compared to where it was a year ago, or even in the slot with Trevor Pena. It was really the Tyler Warren show. At least that's my perspective, kind of as an outsider. It feels like they're a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, that was a very accurate assessment.
Okay, because I think he had like a 32% target share or something. I was pulling it up, looking at it again. They're a little bit more nuanced. They have a little more speed on the outside. How does Oregon's young secondary match up there? And then when Oregon has the ball, can they hit some of these explosives? Like, that's been something that has allowed them to separate early, is whether it be, a 60-yard run in the second game, or the explosive pass plays to Corian Moore or Blake Benson. Like, can they land those? Does Penn State susceptible to those? What's this? I guess ultimately, like, the Will Stein, Jim Knowles of it all is probably something that needs to be talked about. Like, Jim Knowles and Will Stein, I guess you can say they're 1-1 last year because they split the games, but I think anybody who's looking at it objectively would say, well, Knowles really kind of took it to him the second time, and that wasn't a particularly competitive, coordinator matchup. So that's very much front of mind. So, and then you get to the score prediction, Tyler. I don't know if you're having as much difficulty as I am, but this has been one that's been really tough. I've gone back and forth. I've kind of come to the point here where I don't know if I have enough conviction to change from my preseason pick, which was a narrow Penn State win. So I actually made the final call in the Q&A written form that we just shared, and said, okay, I'm going to stick with it. And so I've got Penn State 27-24, a close competitive game. I think that's probably, maybe you disagree, kind of more the range from a score perspective that Penn State would be more comfortable winning in than Oregon. I think Oregon would love to play this game in the 30s or something like that. But I think it's going to be a 4-quarter game, knockout, drag out, dogfight, fun game, a game where I think we both sides learn, like, hey, there's still a lot of things to work on, but when this product is finished, like, it's capable of taking it the distance.
And it could just be round two, or it could just be round one, I should say. Round two could be later on this season. We'll learn a lot. And we're going to give our picks on our third episode this week that'll drop later. But you and I are of a very similar mind on how this game plays out. So I'll reveal mine. I appreciate you for sharing yours. And again, you referenced it there. We've exchanged some written content as well. It'll be coming to the site from Eric. I have some written content going to their site. But Eric Scopel, if you want to follow all the Oregon pregame coverage and leading up to this matchup, go over to Duck Territory within our 24/7 Sports Network. We appreciate the collaboration, Eric, and look forward to watching this one go down. A big moment for both teams.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tyler.
That's right. Let's dive into the other component of Saturday evening, which is the recruiting spectacle that awaits in Happy Valley. To do that, we bring in our resident recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso. Tyler, how's it going?
It's going well, man. It's been a busy week tracking down all these visitors, but it's been a fun week. And if you're a Penn State fan, if you're looking beyond the on-field importance of this, there's a ton of importance on the recruiting front as well. Biggest visitors list, maybe the program's history, most talented group of recruits maybe in program's history for this game. And look, there's a lot on the line, and there are going to be a lot of top prospects in town to see what goes down inside Beaver Stadium on Saturday night.
You have been reporting on this guest list for weeks, probably months, actually, because guys lock in for the whiteout very early in the calendar. But there have been a lot of confirmations coming fast and furious at a rapid pace. A lot of credit to you. Of course, national analyst Brian Dona as well, doing a lot for us along the way. A lot over at Lions247.com. And I didn't mention this earlier, but in honor of the whiteout, we got a special going, 50% off VIP access for an annual subscription, so you can jump on board now and you're covered through all of next offseason. The other opportunity we have, which is pretty cool, you jump on with a monthly subscription, you pay that full price, but you're automatically locked in with Paramount Plus access through our partnership. So you can go 1 month at full price and you get Paramount Plus access on your television, which ton of TV shows, a ton of streaming sports and all that. Or you just jump on board, full annual deal, 50% off. Now that I got that out there, Tyler, this is your 4th season covering Penn State football recruiting. This is the 6th whiteout event that you've covered. There was 3 of them last year. Is this at the top of the chart?
Yeah, it's not even close. Nor I think the biggest visitors list that I've had the opportunity to sort through and kind of comb through when it comes to tracking kids down, probably been around 150, 140, 150 range. This is approaching that. It's going to go over that number when it's all said and done. And just the number of blue chip prospects coming to town, it puts this visitors list over the top when it comes to a whiteout game, Ohio State game last year, any other game since I've been on the Penn State beat. This one, it kind of blows it out of the water. You've got several 5-star prospects coming to town. The volume of 4-star prospects is what really, really stands out about this visitors list. Because, sometimes you get some top level kids scattered about on these visitors lists and then filled in behind them or some so-so guys. No, this visitors list is loaded from top to bottom. I mean, the number of 4 stars is impressive. The kids who were 3 stars, I mean, we're talking about guys who are either underrated, they're top of the board targets for Penn State, regardless of ranking. So make no mistake about it. No matter how you slice this visitors list, no matter how you want to get into it, no matter how you want to break it down, it's the most talented visitors list I've seen in my time covering Penn State. As I said, in speaking to people and asking around, very likely ever in the program's history. So James Franklin and his staff, the support staff behind the scene as well, they deserve a ton of credit because it is not easy to put something like this together. It's a recruiting spectacle. Let's just call it what it is. It is every year, but this is a different level. And a lot has gone into putting it together. So that entire group deserves a ton of credit. And there aren't many support staffs better in college football than Penn State's, and these guys, they have a tendency to deliver, and they've teamed up with the on-field staff to do just that in formulating this visitors list.
Big opportunity and challenge for guys like Kenny Sanders, Alan Zamitis, Slim, the guys who live and breathe recruiting and trying to build this roster to chase championships. And you've got not just those 180 or whatever the number ends up being prospects, but you got moms, dads, grandparents, siblings, what have you, joining them on campus. You want to make a strong impression on everybody. And oh, by the way, your actual coaching staff, we know James Franklin goes out there at the 50-yard line, gives some handshakes and hugs, but they're preparing to face the number 6 team in America in that same building. So there's a lot going on. They're juggling a ton. You want to rattle off some of those headliners for us? I don't know if there's any right way to do this. It's not going to be an hour-long segment. We also want to keep some of our VIP stuff VIP on the site. But why don't you go ahead and basically tell us who you think our listeners and viewers need to know will be in State College on Saturday?
Yeah, there's really not a right way to do it, just given the length of the list. So we'll just run through it, go offense, defense. We'll start on offense. Got the number 1 quarterback in the country coming to town, Elijah Haven. Penn State trying to get involved there late. They're still searching for that 27 quarterback. Haven doesn't have an offer from the Nittany Lions yet, but he and his family, they've been open to learning more about the program, and they're going to get to State College for this game. And we've gotten a ton of questions throughout the week. Oh, is he just coming to see the White Out because it's, the White Out and everyone wants to go to the White Out? No, that's not it. I think there is a legitimate level of interest and at least learning more about what Penn State has to offer a quarterback of Haven's caliber. Max Hiller, 5-star in the trenches, in-state guy on the offensive line. Got the chance to see him play last week. We'll get into that a little bit more later. He is going to be in town for a really important visit. Penn State is working so hard to keep him home. Nittany Lions up there on the list along with the likes of South Carolina, Clemson, Alabama. So that's a big visit. They're getting Matt Gregory, another 5-star kid from in Pennsylvania. Really talented, fast wide receiver. He's going to be back on campus. Dakota Grant, he's another highly ranked receiver who's going to be on campus. Defensively, you've got the number 1 cornerback in the nation, John Meredith, coming to town. You throw on this kid's tape. The competition in Texas is legit. Everyone knows that. And opposing offenses, they just stay away from him. And any clip that he has, he's locking receivers down. He's making really impressive plays on the ball. So you've got players of that ilk. And 28 class, you've got a bunch of top 100 kids from that group coming. You've even got a few 2029 visitors. So there are a bunch of blue chip recruits. I know I said it earlier, but really it would take an entire hour plus to go through the list of 5-star, 4-star kids. There are a ton of top targets on both sides of the ball coming to town. Those are the kids that stand out to me. There are a bunch more. We've been detailing them on the site throughout the week. We only have so much time here, but I wanted to mention the in-state kids on offense specifically, in addition to Elijah Haven, because when it comes to the formulation of that offensive side of the board, there are not many targets more important than guys like Matt Gregory and Max Hiller. Penn State really, really, really wants to keep those guys home. They're in a position to do so. Putting on a positive visit in this kind of a setting goes a long way in making that happen.
I'll tell you, I can't say, I mean, can't count how many times I've heard from prospects back when they're, making the transition to Penn State, or even Penn State players when they're juniors, seniors, looking back at the experience of how this is a tipping point for people and their families, where they may experience this as a non-committed player and they may make their decision a year or months down the line. But when they sit down, it's something that they have a hard time shaking from their head, what they experienced in that whiteout. You've had those kind of conversations before. Can you kind of put some context to it for our listeners and our viewers? Because I'm sure everybody understands why recruits would want to be in their seats for a marquee matchup like this, an environment like this. But what do they carry out of it that makes an impact when Penn State's trying to push to the finish line for a commitment?
For some of these kids, it starts really from the moment they arrive in town. They see the tailgate scene. They see how invested this fan base is in the success of the program. That's a big part of it right off the bat before they even set foot in Beaver Stadium, before anything kicks off. That's a strong first impression that resonates with a lot of these kids long term. And then once the games start, I think the whiteout environment and the atmosphere, it essentially speaks for itself. But, when you reflect on this, when you go back home and you leave a whiteout game, especially after a Penn State win, there have been many, many instances of success, on-field success, coming off a whiteout game. And these kids, they look back and they see the passion that the Penn State fan base has, and they see what it's like for an opponent playing in that kind of setting, how difficult it is, knowing that when they get to college, they'll have that kind of home field advantage. That's something that goes a long way in kind of solidifying where kids view Penn State. And then also, a lot of kids, they appreciate the way they are treated during the whiteout. I got the chance to catch up with, I'll give you an example, George Parkinson. He's a top 100 edge rusher in the 28 class, Malvern prep kid, in-state guy. I was talking to him, and he knows that whatever interaction he has with the Penn State staff on Saturday, it's going to be more condensed than it would have been otherwise if he had visited during the non-conference slate or for another Big Ten game. But he means a lot to him that he knows the staff members that he does get to talk to, they're taking time out of a very busy night. And you said they're prepping for the number 6 team in the country. There's a lot on the line, yet these coaches are giving them undivided attention before kickoff. So that's something that when I talk to recruits after the fact and you hear it going in as well, that's something that means a lot to these kids when they reflect on the experience, because they know everything that's going on. And the fact that they were made to still feel like a priority in that setting, it speaks to the way the Penn State staff approaches a situation like this.
Let's talk about commitment flip potential, because we're in that part of the count. By the way, I can hear your pups fired up for this one.
I decided to do the podcast out in the living area today, and so.
That's okay. It's nice of him to chime in occasionally. That's okay. The commitment flip conversation, we discussed it last fall. Cam Smith, Matt Outen ended up coming on board after committing other places first and signed with Penn State later. We have, I know, one confirmed because he put it out there publicly. I know that our policy at Lions 24/7 is to avoid publishing or putting this kind of stuff out there until kids got feet on the campus and we got eyes on the kid. Can you talk us through a little bit about this dynamic on this particular Saturday?
Yeah, you kind of just laid it out. We usually defer to the kid in this kind of a situation because, I have respect for all parties involved. We like to go about this a certain way. You've got some guys, sometimes they put it out there. Stanley Montgomery's the guy you're referencing. He's a Syracuse defensive line commit. He announced on Twitter that he's going to be at the Whiteout game. He's a 2027 kid. We saw him during the summer for camp. He impressed the Penn State staff during that. They've been keeping tabs on his junior season. There are definitely guys, Carter Gooden is another one who's out there publicly, high-level recruit in the 2026 class. He's pledged to UCLA, plays defensive line for Tabor Academy in Massachusetts. Penn State got him for an official visit during the summer. Didn't go their way, but with the coaching changes at UCLA, the changing climate out on the West Coast, Gooden is giving Penn State another look. He's going to be back in town for the whiteout. There are a few 26s, just kind of keeping an eye out, monitoring it quietly behind the scenes. Some guys who may or may not pop up on campus. I'll say this: there's not a 0% chance that a 2026 kid who's committed elsewhere does not show for the whiteout game. But that's not a name that we're going to get into until that kid makes it to campus, because there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes in recruiting right now. And that's why we like to go about things a certain way. I know there are probably people who are chomping at the bit. Who is it? Who's committed elsewhere? Who's going to be? And I get that. Trust me. I completely understand it, because it's an exciting time, right? There's so much of the focus of this whiteout visitors list. It's the elite 2027 kids, but there's still a 26 class to be finished off here. And the Penn State staff is still working really hard to achieve that. And that, that's going to come with some potential flips. We saw it last cycle, last year, UCLA game in October. You had 4 kids show up on campus who were committed elsewhere. I believe 3 of them wound up flipping to Penn State. Or 2 of them wound up flipping to Penn State. So anytime you can get a kid who's committed elsewhere back to campus, it's an angle that you want to try and at least work. Trust me, the Penn State staff is trying. We'll see who ultimately shows when it's all said and done.
We'll take a nameless approach to this conversation largely because of what we just discussed. But if certain players committed to other programs that Penn State previously pursued do show their face and end up in the stands and part of this whiteout conversation, what's the carryover? What's the carryover for how we need to view their recruitment and Penn State being involved, and maybe where their commitment might stand with another school? Because I know the last thing that Penn State fans would want to see is a Nittany Lions commit, showing up on some other Big Ten campus for a big-time matchup.
Yeah, I'd say we probably view it in a similar ilk, right? You can try and paint the picture a certain way. You can try and swing things a certain way. But, if you're committed to another program and you're popping up elsewhere for a visit, it's going to open eyes to some degree, regardless of what's said post-visit about how solid your commitment may be. Your actions are kind of showing you that, hey, look, you're at least, bare minimum 1% giving another program a look. So I'd view it the same way as if a Penn State commit in this 26 class decide he wants to pop out elsewhere for another visit. Something you got to evaluate. You have to evaluate the NIL aspect of it. You have to evaluate the pre-existing relationship with the program that, that player is visiting. And from the Penn State perspective, same way. What was your relationship with this kid before he committed elsewhere? How close were you to getting things across the line before he committed elsewhere? What does the situation look like from an NIL perspective? That's part of it as well. Some kids, that's an avenue that they will explore late in the game, whether that be to drive up a price or because they're legitimately interested in seeking an opportunity elsewhere. There are so many more moving parts, I think, on the flip front now than there were in the past, just because you have the NIL aspect of it. You also have the portal aspect of it as well. Even if you don't close on a kid right now, if you keep getting them back, and he still signs with his original school of choice, but he decides he wants to play elsewhere later on in his college career, he can think back to an experience like this and say, hey, look, Penn State, maybe that's a program that I'll consider again. So there's just a lot that goes into it in a lot of different ways now.
Great points. Yeah, it has changed. Tyler, we're going to get into some live evaluation that you got on a Penn State commit and a top Penn State target to close out this segment. But because you were in the press box with us last time, you covered Game 3 in place of Daniel Gallen with us. I know that you're pretty in tune with what's happening with this Penn State roster and how they've developed it. What are you most curious about when things kick off on Saturday night?
I'm interested in, I think, really kind of what I wrote about post-game after Villanova is the 2 things. One, is Penn State going to be able to flip the switch? Because it's not easy going from playing Nevada, Florida National, Villanova to number 6 team in the country. I think there's something to be said about that on the other end of that as well. It's not easy to play down to that kind of competition. So there, maybe flipping the switch might not be as difficult as some might anticipate or think. So I'm looking for that, because I think Penn State's going to be up for this game regardless of who they played in non-conference play. It's the whiteout. It's a top 10 team. It's a conference opponent. You're leading off conference play with one of the top teams in the nation. I think they're going to be up for this game, no doubt about it. But how do you flip this switch once you start flying around on the field and the competition level is undoubtedly higher? The second thing is the offense going to be able to tap into the kind of consistent rhythm that it needs to be able to win this game? Because I think, and I said this on the postgame podcast after the Nova, I think this defense, regardless of the level of competition in non-conference play, I think it has the pieces and I think it has the scheme to compete with an offense like Oregon's and any other offense in college football. I think Dante Moore, Oregon's quarterback, he's going to be walking into an environment that, quite frankly, he has not seen before in his collegiate career. How does he handle that? So I think defensively, Penn State is going to do what it has to do. Now, Penn State's offense, are you going to be able to run the ball well? Is one of Katron Allen or Nick Singleton going to take charge in the backfield? Are you going to be able to sustain drives? Is Drew Aller going to be able to process Oregon's defense at the requisite level he needs to process it? Because I've said it time and time again, Dan Lanning and that Oregon staff are going to throw as much as it possibly can at Drew Aller. They're going to get creative with their defensive play calling. There's going to be a lot of disguising. They're going to try and force Drew Aller into making mistakes. They have plenty of film to go back on from last year's conference title game. They have plenty of early season film on Penn State to evaluate. That staff is going to be locked in knowing what they're calling. So is Penn State's offense going to be able to hold up, sustain drives, and find the consistent rhythm that it was very candidly saying going into the bye week that it needed to find? That's the two questions that I have going into this one.
Good stuff from UTC. Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen will join me for our third episode later this week, and we'll give you our final thoughts on the game, our players to watch, our score predictions as well, and we'll also be fresh off the practice field, so we'll have some things to share from there as well. Tyler, I wanted to finish, as I mentioned, you got over to some Pennsylvania high school football action this past weekend, and you got to watch Coatesville area high school squad, and that features a Penn State linebacker commit and Terry Wiggins that they're very excited about in the 2026 class, and someone you already referenced a couple times as part of this recruiting opportunity, Maxwell Hiller, 5-star offensive lineman, longtime target for the Nittany Lions. He has been on the radar since he was a freshman All-American. So what did you see?
Saw a lot of good things, especially out of Terry Wiggins. So Coatesville, it was interesting. I wasn't anticipating the kind of start they got. They found themselves down 21-7 pretty quickly. It was not what I was anticipating. They were shooting themselves in the foot a little bit. There were definitely some self-inflicted wounds that they needed to get past. They eventually did. So they went to the locker room trailing. Westchester East didn't really run the ball at Terry Wiggins much in the first half. They kind of just worked their way around him, avoided him. Granted, they had some short fields to work with because of Coatesville turnovers as well. So, frankly, there weren't just many opportunities for Wiggins to make the kinds of plays we've become accustomed to seeing him make on tape. Then the second half started. Coatesville got rolling, and Terry Wiggins really, really got rolling. He was flying around, making plays sideline to sideline. He had a really big sack on third down when it was still a 28-21 game. I mean, Coatesville's defense really delivered in the second half. Wiggins was really the driving force behind that. Hiller was on the defensive line for Coatesville as well. He made a tackle for loss in the second half. But Wiggins, I mean, as the game went on, he kind of took it over and dominated defensively. There was this one play, and I know Terry regrets it, so for years of the podcast, there was this one play where he had a kid on Westchester. He's lined up in the backfield. The kid broke off the tackle. Still, he wound up still getting dropped for a little bit of a loss, but Wiggins was frustrated with himself. That's the kind of player Terry Wiggins is, man. He holds himself to a very high standard. He's looking to deliver, and I'll tell you what, my first time seeing him with pads on in action, very, very impressed. I could see why the Penn State staff is as excited as it is about having Terry Wiggins in this class.
I'll recall what Brian Doan told us on this podcast after Wiggins committed. I think that was back in May or late April. He said that if you put Terry Wiggins on a prominent team in Florida or somewhere in the South, he says he has every team circling around him every single day. He said this is one that Penn State was able to get done relatively early and without a ton of drama on home turf. And Brian basically said this is one that long-term he can be a major face of the Penn State defense. And when Brian says that, a guy who's been covering the national recruiting scene for decades now, I listen very closely, and you've kind of corroborated a lot of that along the way as well. We will get another look at Wiggins, I'm sure, as things go forward here during his senior season. Really appreciate the perspective, Tyler. I know there's going to be a ton of content coming from you today, tomorrow, Friday, all through Saturday, all past the weekend. The Whiteout weekend is going to be a huge deal for recruiting. Whether you're already on board with us or you want to take advantage of one of those special offers that I mentioned earlier, I highly encourage it because this is the week to follow Tyler's coverage. Man, you crushing it. Keep up the good work, and we'll talk real soon.
Oh, man, appreciate it. You guys are crushing it too, man. Keep doing what you're doing. If you're not a subscriber, now's the time to jump on board. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss out on this deal. Now is the time.
You heard it there, folks. We're going to wrap up this episode on that note. Big thanks to Tyler. Before him, Eric Scopel from Duck Territory within our 24/7 Sports Network. Hopefully you appreciated a pretty comprehensive episode this time around. We'll get back to you with another one. Like I said, we're on the practice field tonight, Wednesday. Bunch of coverage, notebooks, photo galleries, video highlights, and a conversation with James Franklin and players. All going to be coming your way at lines247.com on Wednesday evening into Thursday morning. And now we've got another podcast coming for you later this week where we give you our final thoughts on this Penn State football squad leading up to the matchup, and we'll give you our score predictions as well. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lines 24/7 podcast.